Hello and welcome to another episode of Leaders of Transformation. Today we're going to talk about change. And you know what? The world is changing so fast right now that it's creating uncertainty, it's creating anxiety in people and just all-time highs in those areas. And so I invited a very special guest onto the show to talk about that and specifically how to thrive as the pace of change increases. How do you use it to your benefit? And so our guest today is Jim Jubelirer, and he is an exponential mindset evangelist. He actually encourages and actually helps people to move forward faster as things are changing. And he works with entrepreneurs and executives in leadership and business while tapping into a new way of thinking so they can solve their own obstacles. He's a seasoned executive business coach, public speaker. He speaks to a wide variety of audiences about leadership and business excellence. He is a certified Gazelles coach, and we'll talk more about what that is. Also, he serves as an executive coach at Duke University. And he has been featured in a book called The Art of Mastering Success alongside Les Brown, Mark Victor Hansen, Jack Canfield. He is certainly in good company, has a tremendous amount of experience as an executive and as a leader in helping people to create exponential growth. So Jim, welcome Leaders of Transformation. We're glad that you're here today.
Thank you, Nicole. I'm happy to be here with you.
Well, it's an interview that we've been starting and stopping and trying to do for a while. So I know it's going to be good with the amount of delays that we've had. And this is a really, really important topic. And so let's start off with kind of calibrating where we're at right now in the world. So talk to us. Where do you see the world? How do you view it currently right now in terms of its state and how people are perceiving what's going on right now?
Yeah, well, it's very simple. All you have to do is go home from work and turn on the TV, read the newspaper, or even worse, open your social media feeds, and you will see that everything's going to hell. War, famine, political upheaval, tons of stuff. And while all of that is true, it's not the whole truth. The whole truth is now is the best time in human history to be alive. Health and longevity and wellness are skyrocketing. Poverty, violence are at an all-time low. So there's a whole bunch of different factors that are affecting that. And it's important to realize that the news media just feasts on what's not working, not what is on working. And so my work is helping business leaders get a more robust picture about the state of the world today in order to give them more confidence to go solve the problems that they do see. So this is not to say that I'm not seeing all the problems in the world. My mission is to empower visionaries to go solve those problems.
Well, you bring up a really good point because I mean the fear that comes from watching this. I mean, I know myself. I rarely watch the news. I just kind of get snapshots, so just kind of get a sense of what's going on out there, but not letting it really consume me and or influence me in a significant way. But even in that, you kind of can look at it and say, "Oh my gosh! Like, what can one person or even what can our company do? Like, how can we really make an impact if everything's going to, in the dumps, then what am I going to do? Like, I'm just one person." And that's that's why this podcast exists and the community that I've developed around it is to encourage people that, you can be a leader of transformation. In fact, I do believe that there is, like what you're saying, is there is a shift that's happening. There's more people out there than people realize, and that's being portrayed out there of people that are doing amazing, amazing things to make a difference. And as we hear more of those stories, people, and like yourself, the providing the tools, learning the tools, and having the skills to be able to say, wow, you know what, I actually can make a difference, and here's how I make a difference. So that's where we are right now. Where do you see us going in the future? And how do we position ourselves, which is a loaded question. I know that we could talk the whole time about this particular thing, but where are we going and how do we get there?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let me address that bit about what can I do or what could my company do. People don't have a, it's not a widely understood about how change actually happens. And Malcolm Gladwell did a fantastic job with his book, The Tipping Point, that says nothing's happening, and then all of a sudden it's happened. How did that happen? My son just completed his undergraduate college studies, and in his thesis, he wrote about social change movements. And in movement after movement of different sorts and in different places around the world, we think of America being a democracy, meaning, oh, you have to have 51% of the people in order for something to happen. But in terms of these kind of change movements, it's really only 2 or 3%. Once you have 2 or 3% of a given population speaking, acting, thinking a certain way, they can influence others to cause that tipping point to come about. So right now you have politicians who are campaigning on negative news. So there's a lot of negative news. The world's going to hell, make America great again. It's actually a beautiful, brilliant story, and it's worked quite well. It's helped the current president get elected. So we want to give credit to successful communications campaigns, not getting caught up in whether it's, what the facts are. They're just saying that was a very effective campaign. But let's unpeel it a little bit. We're actually, as a human species, we're hardwired to be fearful. It's how we've evolved over time. So fear, uncertainty, and doubt are actually hardwired into our nervous system. And the entire news and entertainment, the entire media landscape is built to take advantage of that, to manipulate us. So if it bleeds, it leads. And all that news reinforced over time gets people thinking that things are really bad. But I gave you a few little factoids, and in my workshop we go into much greater depth. 100 years ago, World War I killed 16 million people, and the flu killed 50 million people. And that's when the population was 1/5 of what it was today. So the world was basically consumed with death only
Wow.
100 years ago. What's happened since then? Human longevity has doubled. It's gone from 40 years to 80 years. And violence, human against human, be it world wars, civil wars, homicides, etc., are all at an all-time low. Now, you wouldn't know that, as I said, from your news, but if you look at the actual facts of the world today, now is the best time in human history to be alive. So that's a very
Wow.
important point for people to study and understand and look at, in terms of, if you look at the long arc of human progress over time, you actually see that progress itself is exponential. And this is a very important point for people to realize. So I'll give you an example. The polio vaccine took some number of years to develop, many, many years. It wasn't like an overnight success or anything. When it first came out, it went to basically the rich white people in the developed world, but only for about 10 years. And then it went worldwide, and polio as a disease got eradicated. So the point is, once these breakthroughs happen, everybody can benefit from them. It isn't just that the haves are getting more and the have-nots aren't. The have-nots are increasing what they have at an increasing rate relative to what the haves have. And what that means is we're moving more towards an era that one of my mentors, named Peter Diamandis, speaks about. And it's the concept of abundance. And I don't mean abundance as far as like just a nice word, but literally we have the technology and the ability now to meet every human being on the planet's basic need for subsistence, housing, education, and freedom. And we're not there yet. So I don't want to say that we are there. We're not there yet. But just since Y2K in the year 2000, more people have escaped or left extreme poverty than have done that over the whole history of humanity up till then.
Now, that's interesting because that totally shifts the perception. Is totally different from what we actually see. Everybody's thinking, "Oh my gosh, it's getting worse and worse, and the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer." And while that might look that way, what you're saying is, even if this gap is increasing, it's everybody's moving up. Is what I'm hearing you say. Is that correct?
Yeah, well, there's something called the elephant chart. And
Okay.
it's called that because it has this, it looks like an elephant from the side. It sort of curves up, and then it has this deep dip, and then this really sharp thing at the end. What is it? It's a graph of income all across the world. This is not just US, in deciles, 10%, 20%, etc. So the poorest 10% of all humans has seen their income rise, and the 30 and the 40th percentile have seen their incomes rise. People between 70 and 85% have seen it go like this. Who is that? Those are the college uneducated in the developed world. And there's a lot of people, literally 15% of the world's population is struggling. And you see that in the nationalistic movements in Europe and in the US. And then you hear about the 1%. They're off the charts. Yes, that is happening, but really that's the 0.01%. If you're somewhere between 85 and 97%, your income has been rising too. So we can say that it hasn't been uniformly equal, but everybody except one slice of humanity has seen their incomes rise over the past 30 years. Now, it doesn't feel that way if you were laid off or if you're out of a job. I don't mean to minimize any individual person's suffering, but I do believe it's very important that we balance the overwhelmingly negative and biased news that we get with the actual objective facts of the state of human progress today.
Well, yes, and if you think everybody is actually going through this, I remember when 2008, when the recession hit, everybody was like, okay, you know, we're all in this same boat. Then if you think that we're all, in the same boat, then you don't see yourself, you don't see a way out of the boat, right? Like, because everybody's in it, and I guess so. Very interesting. Now, coming back to what you said about the tipping point, and that's what I was referring to when I said I feel like we are actually closer to hitting a tipping point overall than we realize, in terms of people wanting to make a change, looking to make a positive change. But at least that's just my perception. I feel like I'm talking to more and more people around the world that are in their little corner of the world, are doing some amazing things. There's just more and more of that conversation. Now, let's get into specifics. I know you're passionate about renewable energy, certain areas. Certainly, Peter Diamandis is interested in specific areas. And I know you said like you were working with him, which, by the way, it's got to be super awesome. I've read his books and learned about what he's doing with planetary resources and so forth. It's amazing. So the 2% that you're talking about, what areas do you think that we're close to that 2% where we're going to start to see a shift?
Yeah, well, excellent question, Nicole. So the idea of, let's just take a look at the word exponential. It's a fancy word. What the heck does it mean anyway? So if I take 30 linear steps, 1, 2, 3, 4, by the time I've taken my 30th step, I will have covered, and each step is a foot long, I'd have covered 30 feet. Exponential means 1, 2, 4, 8, etc. By the time I've taken 30 exponential steps, I would have covered 1 billion feet. And you say, whatever, what are you talking about? If I told you that there are 5 guys working in a bedroom on some silly app on their phone that has something to do with air mattresses, and you'd be like, whatever. And if I said 5 years later, their market cap is bigger than all of the hotel chains in the world, you would say, that's impossible. And I would say, no, that's exactly what happened. And if I pointed to 5 other guys in a different bedroom making a silly little app that has some weird thing where they match drivers and passengers in cars, and you'd be like, what? And 5 years later, they would have disrupted many, many industries from taxi to shipping to meal delivery. You'd say, that's impossible. And I would say, no, that's exactly what's happening. So I only mention the examples of Airbnb and Uber because people can see them, they know about them, et cetera. But these revolutions are happening in every industry now, in medicine, in scientific discovery, in the way citizens collaborate with non-government entities, even the way some governments operate are all going through this kind of revolution today. So it's really everywhere. And leaders of transformation train themselves to look for that, to see examples of the transformation, and then hop onto those waves and take advantage of them. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. And speaking of that, I know that you are a certified Gazelles coach, and I read the book Rockefeller Habits a number of years ago. Very interesting concepts. So talk about, you said they train themselves, leaders of transformation train themselves, or in other words, Gazelles, right? These companies that have exponential growth consistently. So how do they train themselves to do that? Like, so what are some of the elements to that?
Yeah, well, I teach mindset. I'm an executive coach at Duke in their leadership programs. And then I also do this as a business coach. So being in the Gazelles certification based on Vern Harnish's original book, Mastering the Rockefeller Habits, and our new book, which is called Scaling Up. So I sometimes refer to it as the Scaling Up framework. And I work with a small select group of companies who've committed to go on a multi-year journey to apply the Scaling Up framework to their business to really achieve breakthrough results. And so I'm happy to send any of your listeners a copy of the book because I'm quite passionate about it and it's good stuff. And then some companies say, yeah, we've read the book, but we need help guiding us through. So it's teaching, training, mentoring, facilitating. It's a very comprehensive and holistic program across all aspects of the business. And if the business owner wants to, across all aspects of their life as well. So I help some of my clients create philanthropic plans if they've already had, an exit or some success. And but a lot of the focus is on building the leadership team in order to scale up the business.
Got it. And by the way, you have the sunshine coming in on your cheek. You might want to move
Yes,
over a bit.
I will take care of that. Sorry, listeners, that's just what you have to do when you're filming live.
It's live. It's real. Keeping it real. It's awesome. So one of the things that you had an article that it was based on the chapter that you wrote in this book, and you were talking about in that some of the different steps and things that that, and maybe that's the one you were talking about that we could send to the clients or the listeners, I should say. But you talk in there about a 10x return, and specifically you talk about it over a 2-year period of time. And as I was listening to that, I was like, oh, thank God he's not saying 6 weeks or 3 months. Because we hear that a lot, is where it's like, oh, I'm going to 10x your business. Come to my workshop. It's 3 days. And by the time you're done, and the reality is that change takes, and we're talking about the pace of change increasing, but it still takes time for the impact of that to be manifest in businesses. So can you talk a little bit about how, the 10x, the time that it takes to create change, and then we can talk about how you actually do that.
Sure. I work with individuals and executives through my executive coaching practice. And when we're talking about making changes personally, that's a little different, right? You could change your diet today and start to feel great tomorrow. That's a little different. I tend to work with middle market companies, 5 to 50 million in revenue, where the business owner is still working in the company and not enough on it. And they recognize that what got them here isn't going to get them there. And they're smart enough to get help. And so the scaling implementing the scaling up framework is a minimum 3-year journey, where the first year you're just getting the flywheel turning. Year 2, things are really in movement. A lot of good stuff's happening. You have a stronger team, a better product market fit, greater revenue, more cash flow, ability to invest that cash flow into more growth. By year 3, the flywheel's spinning and you can't slow it down even if you wanted to. So that's why I position it as a multi-year journey. And what we do is we set our mindset on, well, what would a 10x look like? 10x is both math and mindset. So if you shoot for the stars and you miss, you'll hit the moon, and that'll still be a big win. So trying to go 100 times bigger, which is 10x, doesn't take 100 times more effort. So you could say, I want to have a 10% improvement or a 10x improvement. And that's the key principle there. And part of it is, how do we think bigger? How do we make bolder decisions? And I don't mean being stupid and running around crazy. We always want to get the R, the return, on our I, the investment. So we make very clear financial decisions. But a lot of people do hold themselves back due to a fear of not being able to take the bigger steps. So when I coach both individuals and companies, I say it's likely that in our first year of working together, you will make the biggest purchase of your life or the biggest investment of your life. And when I tell people that want to go through a personal transformation, I say, spend more money on yourself than you're comfortable doing. Maybe it's an investment in marketing or branding or training or moving to a new city. It could be a lot of different things. But the people that have really gone on to success have made what may have seemed like crazy investments, but that they've worked out over time.
Well, yeah, and it's interesting because I had a mentor of mine that said, if you're cheap with yourself, then others are going to be cheap with you. The world will be cheap with you. And you're talking about abundance, right? Not
Yes.
the woo-woo abundance, but like practically speaking, the abundance that's out there. There's so much out there, but we tend to be cheap about it.
Well, some people do tend to be cheap. Others understand that success means opening your heart and your mind and your body up to others. And sometimes that means giving by giving of yourself. Sometimes it means spending by making those kind of investments.
Yeah.
So
So
you had started to ask a little while ago, you had mentioned renewable energy. So if it's okay, I want to come back to that, because
yes.
what I do in my work and in my workshop is talk about specific use cases that are happening today to give people very concrete understanding of the transformation that's underway. And I keep track of 2 particular industry clusters that are interesting to talk about. The first is autonomous vehicles. Those are self-driving cars. So my day started today with somebody delivering me a brand new self-driving car right to my driveway. It's called a Tesla, and it isn't self-driving, but I bought the fully self-driving option because it's available and it's for sale, and I bought it. So what did I get? I got the promise of some software and hardware in the future that are going to bring certain kind of capabilities. It's a very interesting case study, and I'd be happy to geek out with anybody who wants to on that subject. In practical terms, over the next 3 to 5 years, we're going to see fleets of autonomous vehicles deployed, perhaps not in cities as a whole, but right now I'm working on developing the autonomous vehicle industry in Florida. And if you think of the ginormous housing developments that are down there and the very large college campuses, perfect places to deploy fleets of autonomous vehicles. The research has shown that it's the forecast right now, or it's going to be somewhere between 5 and 10, maybe 12 years till we're going to see some significant penetration of self-driving vehicles. Is it going to be 50% of all the cars? Not yet. But right now, there's 2 billion with a B cars on the planet, 2 billion. And they are all sitting idle 23 hours a day. Think of the billions and billions and billions of dollars, both in the capital cost of the car, the roads, the parking lots, the gas stations. All of that's going to go away as the autonomous revolution happens. And people are like, yeah, for my grandkids. But no, your children aren't even getting driver's licenses. If you're a 30-year-old today and your kids, maybe you have like newborns, they may, depending on where they live, they may never even get a driver's license. They may never even own a vehicle again. Partly because the economics of this are going to be so overwhelming, it's just going to be the fastest, safest, cheapest way to get around. So there will be people that are going to resist. There are entire industries that are under attack, like the oil and gas industry, even the road building industry, and you can expect them to put up resistance. But over time, the economics of it are so undeniable that this kind of change is going to happen. So the transition to electric vehicles, and then the next step after that, which is to self-driving vehicles, is very much underway, and it's probably going to happen much sooner than people realize.
Yeah, or probably even much sooner than most people are comfortable with. I know there's been stories about, mishaps, and even to the extent of people dying in these, testing and all this kind of stuff. But it's scary and it's exciting at the same time as you figure out, what to do. And it's interesting what you talked about the oil and gas industry, because they've been resisting this. This isn't just recent. They've been resisting this for a long time. And inevitably at some point, yes, the overwhelming demand for it, and like the economies of that like you were talking about, they won't be able to prevent it. So it's like, do you fight it or do you join it? I think will be something that they're going to have to look at.
We're going to be, over our lifetime, we are going to be witnessing an epic transformation. And transformation is a nice, sexy sounding word, but you could call it a clash, a disruption. There will be winners, there will be losers. And it'll be interesting to see a number of the most powerful players in the society and in the economy have the most to lose. So how's that going to actually play out? We don't know yet. That's why I want to inspire visionary entrepreneurs to go solve these problems so we can make this transformation faster.
Ooh, so talk about transformation, like you said, clash. A lot of times people say, oh, I want the breakthrough. I want that, result. I want that return on investment. But in order to get that return on investment, there's a breakdown that happens before the breakthrough. So can you unpack that process for us?
The same transformation an individual goes through, society is going to go through. So we have a saying, your breakthrough occurs on the other side of your breakdown or your break from. So some people have to leave relationships that aren't working. They have a break from in order to have a breakthrough. Other times you're beating your head against the wall until you have like a mental or physical collapse. And then on the other side of that is a rebirth. I lost my job at the height of the recession and I didn't get a new job. I wanted to stay in the industry I was in. And those jobs had gone away. And I was fortunate enough to reinvent myself to do what I'm doing now. But all of that happened as a result of the crash. So my breakthrough occurred after my breakdown. So the established interests that don't want to see change, or even if they want to have change, they may have economic incentives to keep things the way they are going to be, there's going to be a struggle for power. You see that in the news today. And while that's an important story, my message to your audience is don't get caught up in that story. Because if you get on the right side of these changes, there's massive opportunities. So just to illustrate one of those, I talked about electric vehicles that are going to lead to autonomous vehicles. How are these cars going to get around? What's going to power them? What's going to power them is the sun, not plants that were in the ground and then got turned into coal and gas. Solar energy is following Moore's law. It's getting twice as productive, or it's getting half as expensive every 2 years. 2 years, half, 2 years, half. So that's an exponential doubling or quickening. What that means is about 12 years from now, energy is going to be free. Almost like you do pay for your cell phone now, but telephony and data and texting, it's almost free. I mean, you pay a
Amazing.
minimum
Yeah.
amount a month, but so energy is going to be free. And battery technology is going to be just massively different than today, not incrementally different. So what new business models are going to be possible then when energy is free? And you could have these fleets of autonomous vehicles driving around for almost free because they don't have any moving parts. Yeah, they have tires that wear out, but otherwise, most of the parts just don't wear out. So the economics of completely transforming our mobility sector are very possible rather quickly in the next 10 years.
So what are some of the industries that you would, if somebody's listening and they're saying, look, I want to make sure we position ourselves in, in industries that are moving forward, that, because every industry is going to be impacted, but there are certain industries that are going to see that growth, and people can position themselves, as Wayne Gretzky is so well known to have said, I go where the puck is going to be, not where it is.
Yeah, fantastic. Let's do a Gretzky. Let's skate to where the puck's going. Very simple. Let's make a list. So somebody comes to you and they say, I'm a little worried about all the disruption. I want the most stable situation, the industry that isn't going to have to deal with this change. Let's make a list of those industries. That would be a trick question. That would be 0. In other words, it's happening everywhere. Business, government, religion, even the way religion and churches are going through a transformation. Politics is very dynamic with different trends coming through. So it's happening everywhere, and I wouldn't say that any particular industry is more attractive or less attractive.
Got it.
But since you asked, I do want to highlight a couple of growth industries that have recently come to my attention that I'm spending a lot of time on. I work with creating a strategic plan for the state of Florida, a long-term vision for the whole state. And one element of it is that every city and county have a resiliency plan. What's that? Who does that? Well, resiliency as a field actually exists today, but it's about to get much bigger. Most of the world's cities, not all, but most of the world's cities are near oceans, and they are going to be rising, and they are going to be rising quicker than people realize. And the smart cities are already investing in everything from changing land use and zoning to incentives for flood insurance. FEMA is about to change the way it does its pricing model, and you're going to have, I just lived through a hurricane that devastated our state. So all these changes are going to continue to happen, and people that are actually working in the resiliency planning field is something that's not on a lot of people's radar, but is going to become a big field.
Very interesting. Yes.
Related to that is anything to do with water. Water is the growth industry of the next 100 years, both in agriculture, human consumption, wastewater treatment, sea level rise. There's many stormwater treatment. There's many aspects to it. But the way states and countries handle their water flow is going to determine their prosperity for centuries to come.
Very interesting. Thank you. I always love to get that little snapshot of, and it's interesting to talk about the state of Florida because, I heard about this and saw pictures in Miami, what's happening there with the water rising and the impact. I mean, it's amazing. I don't think most people realize that this is happening already right now. But let's talk about, oh my gosh, there's so much that we could talk about. I could ask you tons of questions. Of course, the idea is that our listeners, if they own a company, of course, that is in that zone where you're talking about, where they could hire you. You can come in and work with them. That would be ideal. The other option is, of course, they could read from your materials, and so forth. Let's talk about, just for the sake of today, I know there's a couple of different elements that you incorporate from the Rockefeller habits, from that whole Gazelles organization concept, the one-page strategic plan, meeting rhythms, I think, is a really important one. That is, there's a transformation that gets to happen in organizations on that level. So can you maybe talk about some of those practical tips that maybe some of our listeners can sort of like give them some meat that they can take away and start applying today?
Yeah, meeting rhythms are super important in any sized company. Even if you're a solopreneur in your bedroom, when do you put on your thinking hat versus your doing hat? So it's just as true for a company of 1 or 100 or 500. But more specifically in my coaching arena, I tend to work with companies once they have 50 or more employees. They have a leadership team that's running everything, and it starts to break down. It gets too complicated. People are used to when it was smaller and they ran everything on the back of a napkin, and now things that are starting to move around get too complicated. So you need to put the structure into the meeting rhythms. Who gets what information with what kind of specificity and what kind of frequency? And my favorite meeting in the meeting rhythm lineup is what's called the daily huddle. And the technique I use is called a wiffle huddle. Wiffle is an acronym, stands for what I feel like expressing. And everybody stands around in a circle. They don't sit down. One person throws the ball to somebody else, and they say, Nicole, what do you feel like expressing? And Nicole gives a word or a phrase, and then her wins, her stucks, and her focus for the day. She throws the ball to the next person. It's about 90 seconds per person. The whole huddle takes 7 to 10 minutes. And I've had clients tell me that through the implementing of the daily huddle, they've cut the amount of time they have to talk to each other as a leadership team throughout the remainder of the day by as much as 70%. That's
Wow.
because they know they're going to see the person the next day. They can work on the issues after the huddle. And a lot of that email, chitter chatter, fire off a note, all that stuff settles down because you have a regular cadence of the in-person. Ironically, the more we go online and all of that, the more people need to come together eyeball to eyeball to work on these issues.
Yes, I'm just laughing because I'm working from home and my cat is playing on his scratcher right next to me. Timing. He's been sleeping this whole time. But you know what? I love that daily huddle. And what you talked about, I actually call it the what I feel like saying. I learned it from one of my mentors, and it's the what I feel like expressing. And it's funny because I've asked people that question. Like I do it in coaching calls. I start off with that, and they go, "What?" Like they don't know. They're not used to doing that. Most of the time, you just dive right in. Most of the time, people are not fully present in a meeting until you get kind of halfway through, and so you're wasting time. What I loved about this concept is that it's short, it's concise, it's high frequency, short duration, and super powerful. And oh my gosh, I am adverse to committee meetings and long drawn out meetings where everybody's just talking and not doing anything. Nothing's getting done. It's just about pontificating. And all due respect, I know there's some extended meetings that need to happen on occasion, but I love that concept of short calibration every single day. People know what they're focusing on. It's very, very powerful. And speak for a moment about the one-page strategic plan, because with that in mind, I'm sure you've seen them, business plans, strategic plans that are so extensive, and they spent so much time on it, and it's 40 pages long and blah, blah, blah. And then what is it, where does it end up going? It ends up going into somebody's drawer and never gets looked at again, And so can you talk a little bit about the importance of being concise? We're talking about exponential growth and having that exponential mindset, being concise in your meetings, being concise in your strategy and your focus.
If we were to grab one term from the business world that's probably been the most misused, misunderstood concept, it would be the concept of a business plan. So back in the old days when you had to go to a bank to get debt, you took your business plan that was this big honkin' all sorts of stuff. And then if you ever worked in a large corporation, you might have heard about a strategic plan that was some high level thing, but it didn't trickle down to your level. So we use these terms loosely now still, but we actually are hyper focused about what we mean. And in the scaling up framework, I have a tool called the one-page strategic plan. So on one page, it's got 7 columns and different sections. And we don't usually keep it on a page. I like to put it into PowerPoint because you're going to be presenting it to your various stakeholder audiences. It begins with establishing the foundational elements that every company must have. What's your purpose? Who are your core customers? What are your core values? How do you roll? And how do you make money? What's your core business? So 4 foundational elements. And then that's called strategic thinking. And then we have execution planning. What's your 3-year highly achievable goal? Your 3-HAG. How do you break that down into your 1-year annual plan, quarterly initiatives, all the way down to who's going to do what by when tomorrow? And so one of my talks and workshops, I have a white paper, it's called Make Your Strategic Plan a Living Process. And what that means, Nicole, is we can have the high level aspiration, but we need to map it to what's my 1-year goal, what's my quarterly initiative, what am I going to do today? It's what am I going to do today that's the living process. So all of that is captured in the one-page strategic plan in a very easy to use format for everybody in the whole company to get aligned and engaged around the mission and the purpose of the enterprise as a whole.
Yeah, absolutely. And every action, I mean, everything that happens in a company should be somewhere, moving the company forward in that direction of what they're looking to create. So I love that. And
yeah. I just want to add, all of this is doable. So for anybody who's listening going, I'm like, no, companies are doing this and they're loving it and they're getting great results and they're very happy to be going down this path.
Yes. Well, and that's what creates this gazelle, which a gazelle, can you actually define it? So we would use the term. I just realized we haven't defined that.
Gazelle is actually a technical term that comes from economics that was developed in the 1980s when the first round of high growth software and hardware companies like Intel were starting to get off the ground. And the term originally referred to any company that had been growing more than 20% a year for 4 consecutive years in a row. So we don't hold to that definition strictly anymore. There's no like Gazelles scorecard you have to meet, but it just illustrates the point that you're hiring, you're growing, you're in momentum, you have activity going on, you're maybe a little bit excited about the future, but afraid or uncertain about how to handle all the growth that you're going through.
Yes, thank you. So this is all so great. Let's talk about how people work with you. Okay, so we talked a little bit about it, but specifically, I know you have events, you do some workshops, you've got some coming up. How do they reach you? How do they get connected? Because I think what you do, there's so much value in what you do, and for companies that have 50 or more employees and who are looking to create that kind of change, or put it better, is to manage the change that's already happening. Change is going to happen. Anybody who thinks nothing's changing, it's like you may not feel like you're changing, but I assure you there's change happening all around you. Things never stay the same. Either going, as one of my other mentors said, you're either going forward or backward. You're never staying the same. So with that in mind, how do people get connected with you?
Yeah, well, I have a special offer for your listeners that'll be in the show notes. It's a customized landing page that has specific resources that relate to what we've been talking about today. And then that'll also go out to my website where my upcoming events will be listed. My workshop is called Exponential Mindset: How to Thrive as the Pace of Change Increases. And we've touched upon different elements of it today. The final module in the workshop is called How Uber is Disrupting Your Company. And in that module, I have the business owners think about all the trends that we've talked about, how they're impacting them today or could be impacting them tomorrow, and ask them to develop 90-day action plan to do research and get a handle on things, and then a 1-year goal on how to take advantage of these disruptions or how to capitalize on them. So that's the broad arc of the workshop, and it's everything from a 20-minute brown bag to a 1-hour keynote to a 2-day workshop. So it just depends on what people need with the content.
Beautiful. And we'll make sure, yes, that's all in the show notes, links to your website and to that designated landing page. Jim, thank you so very much. As I said in the beginning, we have delayed doing this interview for quite some time due to some of the situations change in my life, which created that. And even today, having some false starts. But you know what? I'm so glad that we had this conversation and hearing from you. And this is just, I know, a tip of the iceberg in terms of your expertise and what you've been able to create within the companies that you've worked with. So thank you so much for spending a little bit of time with us here today.
Thank you, Nicole. I've been really happy to be on the show.
It's been a pleasure. And for our listeners out there, you know, I say this at the end of every one of our podcasts, is leaders of transformation take action. And so take action on something that Jim has shared today. Maybe you look at reevaluating change. Maybe you stop watching the news before you go to bed, and because that in itself will stress you out. You know, it's what the last thing that, by the way, for those of you that don't know, the last thing that you put into your mind before you go to bed is what your brain is going to work on or process all night long. Make it good, make it count. And watching negative news is probably not going to give you the outcome that you desire. So maybe it's turning off the news. Maybe it is looking at your company differently and saying, how can we position ourselves to take advantage of the change? How can we create exponential growth through creating an exponential mindset within our leadership team, or better yet, within our entire organization? If you know, that would be a great, just asking yourself the question will start the process. And meeting schedule, you know, the meeting frequencies, looking at that, having a daily huddle. There's more to that in terms of the frequency that as you work with Jim, he can break that down. But the daily huddle itself is just calibrating your team, short, increments, really, high frequency, short duration is very, very powerful. Or, maybe it's reaching out to Jim and going to one of his workshops, bringing him into your company to work with you. But take action today on something, because if you don't take action today, it gets put off and then it never happens. And then you wonder 5 years down the road, or even 5 months down the road at this point, as the pace of change is increasing, you'll find it, you look back and go, what happened with that? I know that was good. I was supposed to do something about that. So I encourage you, take action. All the show notes for this episode, and of course the 200 plus other episodes that we've done on this show, are all at leadersofttransformation.com. If you're looking for this, of course, you're probably going to be looking for this particular episode. You can type in Jim. Really easy. You don't have to worry about spelling his last name. You can just type in Jim in the keyword search and it will come up, and all the details will be there, and access to the free information that he is provided. So I encourage you to that. Have a great day. Thank you for being here, and we look forward to seeing you in the next episode of Leaders of Transformation real soon.